Hello, I'm Steph from iDRIVEACLASSIC, and today I'm back with a car kindly loaned to me by my friends from the Great British Car Journey Museum down in Derbyshire. It's this fantastic MK1 Astra. Over 250,000 of these cars were sold, but you just never see them on the roads of Great Britain anymore, so trying to find one to test has been incredibly difficult. And not only have I sourced one, but it's of great quality and it's bright yellow, so I couldn't hope for anything better. Now in today's video, as per all iDRIVEACLASSIC videos, I'm going to show you around the outside and tell you about the MK1 Astra. I'm going to show you under the bonnet, through to the boot area, all through the interior, walk you through the dash itself, and then take you out for a driving experience. And best of all, if you really enjoy this video, you can actually book to test this car yourself at the museum. But anyway, there's more about that when I go for a drive. I'll tell you about that then. But first of all, I'm going to kick off, show you around the car, and I'm going to tell you all about the MK1 Astra. This is the MK1 Astra as launched in spring of 1980 and the first front-wheel drive vehicle for Vauxhall, and it came in to replace the Viva HC in the Vauxhall lineup. The front-wheel drive aspect meant Vauxhall now had a real competitor for the growing market of popular front-wheel drive vehicles. For example, the VW Golf, a car we've definitely all heard of. Now the Astra quickly gained positive reviews and it was crowned What Car's Car of the Year in 1980 and only beaten to European Car of the Year by the Lancia Delta. Now if you remember in the Chevette video from last week, we discussed how the T-Car platform had given Vauxhall a little bit of wiggle room to create a car which was suited to the palate of the Brit car buyer. And a lot of people thought they would do it again, but with the Astra it was pretty much identical to the Opel Kadett D, which was made of course on the continent. Now a little bit like those Opel Kadett Ds, this was originally made in West Germany, but production was brought over to Ellesmere Port in England for 1981, and with that production levels soared to meet the demand, because even though it wasn't the cheapest car, the demand quickly came up the ranks. Even though the range at first was very small. So at first Vauxhall only offered the 1300 SGL and the 1300 L Estate. But the range was added to rather quickly, which is always a sign of success, because when you look at manufacturers and they've just sat on the laurels and not really done anything, that's when you see the cars tail off and look really dated quite quickly. But over the 4 years there was a lot added. So first of all, you saw the E version coming in, and it gave you a slightly lower 60 brake horsepower in comparison to the 75 brake horsepower we're getting with the 1300 we're testing today, but those economy versions were always very popular. In 1982, the range welcomed a rather spicy 90 brake horsepower 1.6 litre variant, which really challenged some of those GTI models. But they didn't stop there, because if that wasn't spicy enough, the GTE joined the range in April 1983, offering 115 brake horsepower supported by a 1.8 fuel-injected engine. But really, these 1.3s that we're testing today, this is where it all began. Now over time, with dwindling values, scrappage schemes, rust, camshaft, because some of those with the camshaft are a little bit sketchy and it's a bit of a weak point, and first car owners with a heavy right foot, well, they killed off those MK1 Astras, even though so many thousands were built, which had once graced the roads of Great Britain and been quite commonplace. Now I know there are going to be people that watch this video today and say, well, the MK1 Astra is simply an old banger. But when you do that, you do the car a disservice, because the Astra did a lot for Vauxhall. It made Vauxhall look fresh. It put it back in a competitive space really heavily, and it really changed what the buying public thought of Vauxhall. It gave them a reliable front-wheel drive. It opened Vauxhall up for a new market, and it really was a force to be reckoned with. So that's very brief, but where does the story end? Well, the MK1 wasn't actually made for very long. It was made until 1984, and as of 2022, when we're putting this video live, we're into the 8th generation of Astras. And even people who don't like cars would be hard pushed to say they don't know what an Astra is, which really makes this MK1 a classic. It may not be a traditional chrome bumper, black and white number plate classic, but this Astra definitely sits firmly in this new wave of classics defining an era of motoring. I know on the continent, if you're watching this from mainland Europe, they do call cars like this young timers, which is a very interesting concept in itself and something we might revisit in the future. Now this is a very brief history, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more as we drive and talk to you about some of the quality of the materials used as we look inside. But there are plenty of books online on Amazon, owners clubs, forums, where more information can be found. But in today's video, I'm now going to chat to you about the interior before we take her out on a test drive. One of the really nice things about testing this Astra so quickly after doing that Chevette that I did last week is that I feel it's very fresh in my mind. It gives me a really good starting point to review this fairly. And there are some things about this that I really like in terms of how Vauxhall have moved things on. And there are some things that I feel a bit, I don't know, that I miss from the Chevette that I really enjoyed. But all in all, for where this sits in the market, so it was their first front wheel drive, it's that hot hatch era, it's a very pleasing little car. If for nothing else, the fact that it's yellow and it's complemented by plastic brown, beige, it's like all the nice colour palettes that I quite like. And it almost feels a little bit 70s-ish, which isn't entirely surprising because the car got first launched, didn't it, in terms of public first viewing was in 1979, comes to the market, what is it, February 1980, very early 1980s. So of course it's not going to be all perms and white stilettos. It is still a bit of a 70s hangover because it's not as soon as that clock chimes on the 31st of December that the new era of fashion begins. People sometimes forget when they look back that it is a gradual drip of change. So there are things that I like about this. Number one is that, again, the quality is still there. These seats are still very hard wearing, especially more so when you look at other cars that it would have sat against within the market, and the quality of those isn't quite where these are. It's all still well stitched, it's lasted really well. So we're looking at, again, just shy of 50k on the clock, and it's all held up remarkably well. There are some bits I don't like. It's that creep of more and more of that black moulded plastic, but you've still got that adventurous sense of colour, still that fun. Something that I talked about in the Chevette video, if you remember, is that quite often these what is it, vinyl tops, when you put them into things like Maestros and Montegos, seem to crack, whereas all the Vauxhall stuff that I've looked at hasn't cracked. So I don't know if it's that they've used better material or what they've done, but they've lasted up a lot better. Now, another thing that I really like about this compared to the Chevette is the fact that we now have a glove box, because if you remember on that Chevette, we didn't have one. So inside, it's pretty much the same sort of space that you get with cars of this era. And as you might be able to hear, that plastic is creaking, but a little bit like when I talked about stuff being a little bit 70s-ish when we talked about that Chevette. All the plastic that you get in these 1980s and some of the 90s cars is very creaky. It's a complete characteristic of cars of this era, so I'm not going to mark it down. Now, if you remember when we looked at that Chevette, everything was very simple in the middle, and it was that speaker up here, and there seemed like a lot of wasted space. When we come into this, I feel like the space has been thought about a lot more thoughtfully. So you've got your two heater vents up here. You've got this blanking plate here, which I assume must have been for a clock. Two of them are here. Goodness knows what they're for, but I'm sure somebody at home will know exactly what they're for. Your heater vents are here. Your speaker, your stereo is here. And just down here, you've got a space for your cigar lighter, which is blanked off. And you've got your ashtray there as well. Very pleasingly, that's not been used, so it's all still in fine fettle. Down here, you've got your heater speeds as well, all very straightforward. Now again, the quality, when you feel these knobs and all of these speakers, all of these switches, everything is very good quality, and you can feel that time has been kind to this car. It hasn't. Some cars you get in from this era and they're absolutely knackered. This has actually fared quite well. One of the things that I said I really liked on the Chevette was how simple everything was in terms of your dash. And again, it's simple in front of us here. So you've got your temperature gauge, you've got your fuel gauge, your speedo, and just a few warning lights. Whilst the layout has changed, we haven't massively moved on from what we had in that Chevette. It's all still pretty much the same. Now, something cool that I quite liked is how these lights work. So you've got your lights as you'd expect, but to get your interior light, that's that pull-out function. So that was just quite interesting. Again, it's that clever design that makes use of the limited space that we have available. And unfortunately, the headlining has got that, it's a real 1980s, 1990s thing where they either seem to sag or the glue seems to seep through. But look, these are very small things. And when I take you for the drive, which I'm about to in a minute, you're going to see that everything in here is just overpowered by the fun of the driving experience. I couldn't own one of these because I would definitely getting a speeding ticket. It's brilliant. So that's really everything we've got in here in a nutshell. It's all very straightforward. It's all still very up together, and to say the cars are nearly 50k, so it's not a low mileage vehicle in terms of some of these cars only seem to have about 5k on. It stood up very well. Nothing's really falling apart. There's areas on the car that could be touched up, the things that could be dealt with. But look, the car's from 1980. Of course little bits need doing. It's a remarkably original car and we are very privileged to take it out. So that leaves me with getting her started up. Now, just like the Chevette, I seem to keep struggling with this key. So we've got the 1.3 in this one. Now, if you remember, when we went in that Chevette, I was talking about how it was quite quiet inside. This isn't as quiet inside, actually. This is actually louder, which I'm not really bothered about because I love that real kind of grassroots experience. But if you're somebody who likes to be quite cushioned from the sound of the engine, you're probably going to find this a little bit off-putting. Now, this is what it sounds like from the inside, but I'm going to flip the camera around and I'll let you hear what she sounds like from the outside too. If you'd said to me, which of the two cars do you want to take home? Is it the Astra or is it the Chevette that you took last week? And if it was looks alone, I would have taken the Chevette. And until the point that I started this car up and I took the Astra out for a drive, I still thought I want to take the Chevette home. But once I got out in this, it was a completely different story. Now you can probably see that this car packs quite a punch, which you maybe weren't expecting. But one of the most interesting things about the engine on these is you get, because we're on the 1.3 in this, if you remember I mentioned earlier, you get 75 brake horsepower. Now it may not sound a lot, but in the Cavalier, the Mark II Cavalier 1.6 litre, you were getting exactly the same brake horsepower. So actually, it's quite punchy and it's quite rapid. Now, if you remember when I took out the Chevette last week, I said that it felt a lot quicker than what the tests had said. So when I read old reports on it from old magazines, they said it felt a little bit sluggish. As soon as I took this out, I kind of saw what they meant, because this is very, very quick. It's lovely and responsive, and as you'll see, even as we're going over some of this rocky terrain and we're going around these corners, we've got everything you want in a little small car from this era. The handling is super light, it's really easy to use. Even somebody who's used to a world of power assisted steering would find this an absolute breeze. You've got unrivaled visibility, it's brilliant. The only thing holding it back really is those headrests, but we are of course at this point into the era of headrests and safety is becoming a bit more of a concern. You've got plenty of space around you as well, something that I always hear time and time again from people that don't want to come and try one of these small cars or are turned away from the world of small cars is they think it'll be quite cramped inside. But as you can see in here, we've got plenty of space to manoeuvre around, and it's just all round a pleasant and jolly drive. Now I could tell you all about how fun it is, and in fact the first couple of takes on this I went on and on and on about how fun it was, and I thought no, just chill out, because you can actually come and test this yourself. So if you remember, I mentioned at the start of the video the Great British Car Journey. Well, an arm of that is a facility called Drive Dad's Car, and in that they've got a fleet of vehicles, and in fact this Mark 1 Astra is one of those vehicles. So what you can do is you can come on down and you can test it out and take it out on the little route that I'm driving today. So you get a bit of time in it and you get to experience it yourself. So whilst you're watching this video and thinking, Steph, what is it like to drive? And let me tell you, it's incredibly good fun. It's nippy, it's a little bit louder inside than I would like. Visibility is great and the handling is an absolute dream and the suspension is decent enough. But what's better than coming to test it yourself? So if you've got a UK driving licence, I think that's what you need. I'm not sure if you can drive on a European one. That's something you'd have to check in the museum. Sorry, I forgot to check for you all. You can come and test this yourself. You do need to pre-book, but if you go onto their website, which is in the description on this video, you can find out a little bit more about it. They do have plenty of other vehicles as well. I'm trying to think what else they've got. They've got some of the older stuff. So they've got, I think, an Austin 7, if you like the kind of the older pre-war sort of thing, and they've got some of the newer bits as well. They've got Hillman Imps, they've got this, I think they've got a Mini, I think they've got an MGB. There's loads of stuff anyway, and the fleet seems to change all the time, so you can book more than one on the same day as well. So yeah, all in all, it's a very nice car. It's maybe not for me because as much as I loved enjoying this, it's a really jolly colour, it's lasted remarkably well, the materials that have been used are great. The car really for me was that Chevette. So it's time for me to hand the keys back to the museum. It's been a good fun day out, but until next Sunday when we're looking at something much older, take care and drive safely.